The scent of roasted beef and fresh-baked bread hit Flynn Ingram the moment he pushed open the door of his ranch house, and he froze with one boot still on the threshold, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip. He had lived alone for 3 years now, ever since he had taken over the cattle operation his father built in the rolling hills outside Chico, California, and nobody had any business being in his kitchen, least of all someone who could cook better than the slop he usually threw together after a long day working the herd. "Who's in here?" Flynn called out, his voice carrying the edge of a man who had dealt with rustlers and claimed jumpers often enough to know better than to assume the best. The year was 1878, and Northern California might have been more civilized than some territories, but that did not mean a man could afford to be careless. A woman appeared in the doorway between his front room and the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron that looked suspiciously like one his mother had sewn years ago. She was young, probably around his own age of 26, with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun, and green eyes that assessed him with an intelligence that made him straighten his shoulders despite his confusion. She was pretty in a natural way that had nothing to do with paint or powder, with freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks that suggested she spent plenty of time outdoors. "You must be Flynn," she said, and her voice was steady, confident, not the least bit intimidated by his hard stare or the fact that he still had his hand near his weapon. "Your mother hired me. I'm Eleanor Reeves, and I'll be keeping house for you and making sure you eat something more substantial than hardtack and beans." Flynn let his hand drop away from his gun, but his confusion only deepened. "My mother did what?" Eleanor stepped fully into the room, and he could see she was wearing a simple calico dress in blue that had seen some wear but was clean and well-maintained. "She came to me 2 weeks ago, said her son was out here working himself into an early grave, living like a hermit, and she wanted someone to keep an eye on you. She's paying me to cook, clean, and make sure you don't do anything foolish." The pieces fell together in Flynn's mind with the unpleasant clarity of a puzzle he should have seen coming. His mother, Martha Ingram, had been pestering him for months about his living situation. She lived in town with his younger sister, having moved there after his father passed, and she made no secret of her opinion that Flynn needed a wife, or at least someone to manage his household so he did not work himself to death. He had dismissed her concerns as maternal fussing, but apparently she had taken matters into her own hands. "I don't need a housekeeper," Flynn said flatly, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. "I've been doing just fine on my own." Eleanor raised one eyebrow, and there was something almost challenging in the gesture. "Your mother showed me the shirt you wore to church last month, the one with the buttons sewn on crooked and a tear in the sleeve you tried to mend with what looked like fishing line. She also mentioned that the last time she visited, she found evidence you had been eating nothing but salted pork and coffee for a week straight." Flynn felt heat rise in his face, a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. A man makes do with what he has when he's running a ranch alone. I've got 200 head of cattle, 15 horses, and more work than daylight hours. Forgive me if my sewing skills aren't up to my mother's standards. "I'm not here to criticize you," Eleanor said, and her tone softened slightly. "I'm here to help. Your mother is worried about you, and frankly, from what she told me about how hard you push yourself, she has good reason to be. Now, I've made supper, and it's going to get cold if you stand there glaring at me much longer. Wash up, and we can talk about the arrangements like reasonable people." There was something about the way she spoke, matter of fact, but not unkind, that took the wind out of Flynn's sails. He was tired, bone-deep tired from spending the day riding fence lines in the June heat, and the smell of that food was making his stomach remind him that he had skipped the midday meal entirely. With a sigh that was equal parts frustration and resignation, he moved toward the basin he kept by the door and began washing the dust from his hands and face. "How long did my mother hire you for?" he asked, scrubbing at the grime under his nails. 3 months to start," Eleanor replied, disappearing back into the kitchen. "She paid me half up front, and the rest comes at the end of the term if I last that long. She said you could be stubborn." "That's a polite word for it," Flynn muttered, drying his hands on a towel that he noticed had been freshly laundered. Even his towels had been in better shape this morning, worn and thin, but at least familiar. Now everything smelled like lye soap and lavender, and it made his house feel like someone else's. He followed Eleanor into the kitchen and stopped short. The room had been transformed. The dishes he had left stacked beside the wash basin that morning were clean and put away. The floor had been swept. The windows, which he could not remember cleaning since he moved in, were clear enough to actually see through. On the table sat a meal that would have done a hotel dining room proud: roasted beef, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and what looked like an apple pie cooling on the counter. "How long have you been here?" Flynn asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. "Since this morning," Eleanor said, serving him a generous portion of everything before taking a smaller plate for herself and sitting across from him. "Your mother gave me a key. I hope you don't mind that I cleaned a bit." The cobwebs in the corners were starting to look like they might organize and demand voting rights. Despite himself, Flynn felt the corner of his mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. "You've got a sharp tongue, Miss Reeves." "Mrs. Reeves, actually," Eleanor corrected, and something flickered across her face too quickly for Flynn to read. "Though, I go by Miss these days. My husband died 4 years ago. Cholera." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with the kind of loss that needed no elaboration. Flynn had lost his father to a heart that gave out during a routine day of work, sudden and without warning, and he knew the particular emptiness that came with that kind of grief. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "That's a hard thing." "It was," Eleanor agreed, picking up her fork but not eating yet. "But life moves forward, whether we're ready or not. I needed work. Your mother needed someone willing to live out here and manage your household, and here we are. Shall we say grace?" Flynn nodded, bowing his head as Eleanor spoke a simple prayer of thanksgiving. When she finished, he took his first bite of the beef and had to suppress a groan of appreciation. It had been so long since he had eaten anything that did not come from a can, or his own clumsy attempts at cooking, that he had forgotten food could taste like this. "This is good," he admitted grudgingly. "Really good." "Thank you," Eleanor said, and this time there was a hint of warmth in her voice. "Cooking is one of the few things I'm genuinely talented at. My mother made sure I learned properly before I married, and my husband always said I could have run a restaurant if I'd had a mind to." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Flynn found himself stealing glances at the woman across from him. She ate with neat, economical movements, nothing wasted or fussy. Her hands were those of a woman who worked, with calluses on the fingers and short, practical nails. There was something calming about her presence, despite his initial resistance to the whole situation. She did not chatter or seem to need to fill every silence with words, which he appreciated more than she could know. "Where were you living before this?" Flynn asked eventually, pushing his plate back with the satisfaction of a truly full stomach. "I had a room in town, above the general store," Eleanor said. "I've been doing laundry and mending for people, taking in sewing work when I could get it. It was enough to get by, but barely. When your mother approached me with this offer, it seemed like providence. The pay is fair, I get room and board, and I'll be saving almost everything since I won't have expenses in town anymore." "What are you saving for?" Flynn asked, genuinely curious now, despite his intention to remain distant and disapproving. Eleanor met his eyes directly. "My own place, eventually. Maybe a little shop where I could sell baked goods and preserves. Something that's mine, that can't be taken away. I learned the hard way that you can't count on anything in this life except what you build for yourself." There was steel under those words, the kind that came from experience rather than bravado, and Flynn found himself respecting it. He understood the drive for independence, the need to carve out something solid in an uncertain world. It was why he had stayed on the ranch after his father died, even when his mother begged him to sell and move to town, where life would be easier. This land, these cattle, the work of his own hands, that was real in a way nothing else could be. "Fair enough," Flynn said, standing and carrying his plate to the wash basin. "I suppose if my mother is paying you and you've already moved in, we might as well make the best of it. But I want to be clear about expectations. I'm up before dawn most days, out working until dark. I don't need fussing over or managing. Cook if you want, clean if it makes you happy, but stay out of my way otherwise." Eleanor stood as well, collecting her own plate. "That seems reasonable, and my expectations are equally simple. I'll manage the household, which includes the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and mending. I'll also tend the kitchen garden I noticed is being overrun with weeds, and I'll keep the chickens if you have any. In return, I expect to be treated with respect, to have my privacy honored when I'm in my room, and to be paid on time at the end of our agreement. Can you manage that?" "I can," Flynn said, then paused. "Which room did my mother tell you to take?" "The small one off the kitchen," Eleanor said. She said it used to be a pantry, but you converted it to a bedroom a while back. That had been his father's room in the last months of his life, when climbing stairs had become too difficult. Flynn had left it largely untouched since, unable to quite bring himself to repurpose it, but unwilling to treat it as a shrine either. It seemed fitting, somehow, that it would be used again. "That works," he said. "I'll be in the upstairs bedroom. The necessary is out back, and there's a pump in the yard for washing. I heat water on the stove for baths on Saturday nights." "I noticed the copper tub in the corner," Eleanor said. "I'll make sure there's hot water ready for you each week. Is there anything else you need me to know?" Flynn thought for a moment, trying to imagine what his mother would have told her. "I've got 3 ranch hands who come by during roundup and branding season. But they don't live on the property. Most of the time, it's just me. There's a rifle above the door and a shotgun in my room upstairs. If you hear or see anything that concerns you, don't hesitate to use them. We don't get much trouble out here, but better safe than sorry." Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, a kind of recognition. "I know how to shoot. My father made sure of that before I married. I'm not a crack shot, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if it's close enough." "Good." "Oh," Flynn said, and he meant it. A woman who could take care of herself was worth her weight in gold in this country. "I'll be heading out to check the north pasture first thing in the morning. I'll probably be gone most of the day." "I'll have breakfast ready at dawn," Eleanor said, "and I'll pack you something for midday." Flynn wanted to argue that he did not need her to pack him food like he was a schoolboy, but the memory of that meal was too fresh, and his pride was not strong enough to overcome his stomach's enthusiasm for more of her cooking. Instead, he just nodded and headed for the stairs. "Flynn," Eleanor called after him, and he turned back. "Thank you for not sending me away immediately. I know this is an awkward situation, but I promise I'll earn my keep." "See that you do," Flynn said, but his tone had lost its earlier edge. "Good night, Miss Reeves." "Good night," Eleanor replied, and Flynn could hear her moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes being washed as he climbed the stairs to his room. He lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in his house. It had been so long since he had shared his space with anyone that it felt strange, almost intrusive, to know Eleanor was just below him, settling into the room where his father had spent his final days. But there was also something oddly comforting about it, knowing he was not completely alone in the dark hours before dawn. His mother had overstepped, that much was certain, and he would need to have words with her about interfering in his life. But as he drifted toward sleep, full and comfortable in ways he had not been in months, Flynn had to admit that maybe, just maybe, Martha Ingram had known what she was doing after all. The rooster that crowed at first light was one Flynn did not recognize, and it took him a moment to remember that Eleanor had mentioned chickens. He rolled out of bed with a groan, his body stiff from the previous day's work, and dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness. When he made his way downstairs, the smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted him, along with Eleanor's cheerful voice humming something he did not recognize. "You're up early," Flynn observed, moving toward the coffee pot. "Farm habits," Eleanor said, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "I grew up on a homestead outside Sacramento. My body doesn't know how to sleep past dawn even when it's allowed. I hope the chickens didn't wake you. I brought 4 hens and a rooster from town. Your mother said you used to keep chickens, but they'd all died or been taken by foxes." "That's true enough," Flynn admitted, pouring himself a cup of coffee and taking a grateful sip. It was strong and hot, exactly how he liked it. "I never got around to replacing them." "Well, you have them now," Eleanor said, sliding eggs onto a plate alongside the bacon and a thick slice of bread she must have made fresh that morning. "And I reinforced the coop yesterday afternoon. If any fox wants these birds, he'll have to work for them." Flynn ate quickly, aware of the work waiting for him. True to her word, Eleanor had packed him a lunch in a cloth-wrapped bundle, which he took with a nod of thanks before heading out into the cool morning air. The sun was just starting to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, and his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Jasper, was already waiting by the fence, ears pricked forward with interest. The day passed in the familiar rhythm of ranch work, checking fences, moving cattle to fresh grazing, looking for signs of illness or injury in the herd. When noon came, Flynn found a spot in the shade of an old oak and unwrapped Eleanor's lunch. She had packed him thick slices of the beef from the night before, more bread, some cheese, and 2 generous pieces of apple pie. He ate it all, marveling at how much difference it made to have real food instead of the stale biscuits and jerky he usually subsisted on. By the time he rode back to the house as the sun was setting, Flynn was exhausted and covered in dust. The smell of cooking reached him before he could see the house, and he felt something in his chest loosen slightly, some tension he had not realized he was carrying. For 3 years, coming home had meant returning to an empty house and the prospect of a cold meal eaten in silence. Now there was smoke rising from the chimney and light in the windows, and it looked like a home rather than just a place to sleep between workdays. Eleanor had prepared a stew thick with vegetables and chunks of tender beef, and they ate together again at the kitchen table. This time, the silence felt less awkward, more companionable. Flynn found himself telling her about a calf he had found separated from its mother, and how he had reunited them. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions that showed she understood ranching better than he had expected. "My father raised cattle too," she explained when he mentioned this. "Nothing like your operation, just 20 or 30 head, but enough that I learned the basics. I always liked working with the animals more than the housework, if I'm being honest. But my mother said a woman needed to know how to manage a household." "Do you miss it, the ranch work?" Flynn asked. Eleanor considered the question, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Sometimes. Mostly I miss my father. He died 6 months before I married, an accident with a horse that spooked and kicked him. After that, my mother couldn't manage the place alone, so she sold it and moved in with my aunt. I married Thomas not long after, and we had a small farm of our own for 2 years before the cholera came through." "Did you have children?" Flynn asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too personal. But Eleanor did not seem offended. "No. We were trying, but it hadn't happened yet when he died. Maybe that was a mercy. It would have been harder to manage if I'd had a child to care for on top of everything else." They fell silent again, but it was not uncomfortable. Flynn found himself wanting to know more about this woman his mother had installed in his home, this widow with her practical manner and capable hands. But he was not accustomed to personal conversations, and the words did not come easily. Over the following days they settled into a routine. Flynn would rise at dawn to find breakfast waiting, and Eleanor already busy with some task, whether it was feeding the chickens, working in the garden, or doing the endless laundry that ranch life generated. He would work all day, return for supper, and they would share a meal with conversation that gradually became easier and more natural. Eleanor proved to be intelligent and well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to literature that she was not shy about expressing. Flynn found himself looking forward to their evening talks almost as much as he looked forward to her cooking. A week after Eleanor arrived, Flynn rode into town to pick up supplies and stop by his mother's house. Martha Ingram was in her garden, tending her roses, when he arrived. She looked up with a knowing smile that made Flynn's irritation flare back to life. "Before you start," Martha said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands, "I want you to know I did what I thought was best. You've been living like a hermit out there, Flynn. It's not healthy for a young man." "I'm managing just fine, Mother," Flynn said, though the words had lost some of their heat. "You had no right to hire someone without asking me first." "I had every right as your mother to worry about you," Martha countered, her own stubbornness showing through. She was a small woman, barely reaching Flynn's shoulder, but she had raised 3 children largely on her own while his father built the ranch, and she was not easily intimidated. "Eleanor needed work, you needed help, and I made it happen. Have you been eating properly?" "Yes," Flynn admitted grudgingly. "Is the house in better shape?" "Yes." "Has it killed you to have some company?" Flynn sighed, recognizing a battle he could not win. "No, Mother, Eleanor is fine. She's a good cook and she works hard. But you should have asked me first." Martha reached up and patted his cheek with the kind of affection that was also somehow condescending. "If I had asked, you would have said no, and you would still be eating beans out of a can and wearing shirts held together with hope and poor stitching. Sometimes a mother knows best, darling. Now, come inside and have some tea. Your sister will want to hear that you're still alive." Flynn spent an hour with his mother and his sister, Caroline, who was 18 and full of questions about Eleanor. She seemed particularly interested in whether Eleanor was pretty, which Flynn deflected as best he could. He did not want to admit, even to himself, that he had noticed exactly how pretty Eleanor was, or that he sometimes found himself watching her when she was absorbed in some task, appreciating the grace of her movements, and the way the afternoon light caught the red in her hair. When he returned to the ranch, Eleanor was in the yard hanging laundry. She had changed from her usual calico dress into an older one in faded green, and her sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong, tan forearms. She looked up as he approached and offered a smile that did something strange to his pulse. "How was town?" she asked. "Informative," Flynn said, dismounting and leading Jasper toward the barn. "I visited my mother." "I imagine that was an interesting conversation," Eleanor said, and there was amusement in her voice. "She's pleased with herself," Flynn said, and annoyingly unrepentant about the whole situation. "She cares about you," Eleanor said, pinning one of Flynn's shirts to the line. He noticed she had mended the torn sleeve and replaced the crooked buttons. "That's not something to take for granted." There was something in her tone that reminded Flynn that Eleanor had lost both her parents, and he felt a stab of guilt for complaining. "You're right. I know I'm lucky to have her, even when she drives me mad." "Good," Eleanor said briskly. "Now that we've established that, I should tell you I found signs of a fox around the chicken coop this morning. I scared it off, but you might want to set some traps." Flynn nodded, filing the information away. "I'll take care of it after supper. Anything else happen today?" "A man came by looking for work," Eleanor said. "Said his name was Pete Gardner, and he'd heard you might need an extra hand. I told him you'd be back this evening if he wanted to wait, but he said he'd come back tomorrow morning instead." "Pete Gardner?" Flynn repeated, searching his memory. "I don't know that name. What did he look like?" "Tall, dark hair, maybe 30 years old. He seemed polite enough, but there was something about him that put me on edge. I can't quite explain it." Flynn trusted his instincts when it came to cattle and horses, and he was learning to trust Eleanor's judgment as well. "If he comes back tomorrow, I'll talk to him. But stay inside while I do, just to be safe." Eleanor nodded, and they finished the evening chores in companionable silence. Over supper, Flynn found himself telling her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's dream of building something lasting that could be passed down through generations. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, sharing her own memories of childhood on her parents' homestead. It was the most personal conversation they had shared since she arrived, and Flynn went to bed that night feeling more content than he had in years. Pete Gardner did return the next morning, riding up on a horse that had seen better days. Flynn met him in the yard, aware of Eleanor watching from the kitchen window. Up close, Gardner seemed pleasant enough, with an easy smile and a firm handshake. But Flynn could see what Eleanor meant about something being off. The man's eyes were restless, constantly scanning the property, and his questions about the ranch seemed designed to learn how much Flynn owned and how many hands he employed. "I appreciate you stopping by," Flynn said after a few minutes of conversation. "But I'm not hiring right now. I've got enough help for the season." Gardner's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "That's a shame. Nice spread you've got here. Must be worth quite a bit." "It does well enough," Flynn said carefully. "Good luck finding work." He watched Gardner ride off and did not relax until the man was out of sight over the hill. When he returned to the house, Eleanor was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You saw it too," she said. It was not a question. "Yeah," Flynn agreed. He was scouting the place, seeing what might be worth stealing. "I'll need to keep a closer watch for a while, maybe sleep lighter." "Or maybe you could teach me to shoot better," Eleanor suggested. "I told you I can handle a gun, but I'm not practiced. If you're worried about trouble, it would be good to have an extra set of eyes who knows how to defend the property." It was a practical suggestion, and Flynn found himself agreeing before he had fully thought it through. That afternoon, after he finished his morning work, he took Eleanor out to a flat area beyond the barn, where he had set up old bottles and cans on a fence rail. He showed her how to properly hold and aim his rifle, standing close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used and feel the warmth of her body near his. Eleanor was a decent shot, as she had claimed, but her technique was rough. Flynn spent an hour teaching her how to compensate for windage and distance, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it, how to breathe and hold steady. She was a quick learner, focused and determined, and by the end of the lesson, she was hitting the targets more often than not. "That's good," Flynn said, genuinely impressed. "A few more sessions and you'll be better than half the men in the county." Eleanor flushed with pleasure at the praise, and Flynn realized he had been giving her more compliments lately, noticing when she did something well. It was a dangerous development, he knew. Eleanor was an employee, someone his mother had hired for a specific purpose and a limited time. Getting attached to her would be foolish, but knowing that did not stop him from enjoying her company or looking forward to the moments they spent together. As June turned into July, the days grew hotter and the work more demanding. Flynn was preparing for the annual cattle drive to market, which meant long hours culling the herd and getting the animals ready for the journey. Eleanor seemed to sense when he was particularly tired or stressed, and she went out of her way to make his life easier. She would have cold water waiting when he came in from the heat, or she would rub liniment into his sore shoulders while they sat on the porch in the evening. These small intimacies felt both completely natural and charged with something neither of them acknowledged out loud. One particularly hot afternoon, Flynn returned to the house earlier than usual after his horse threw a shoe. He found Eleanor in the kitchen with her hair down, loose around her shoulders in damp waves, wearing only a thin chemise and skirt while she worked over the hot stove. She had obviously been washing her hair and had not expected him back so soon. When she saw him, she froze, her face going red. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, reaching for a towel to cover herself more modestly. "I didn't think you'd be back until evening." "No, it's fine," Flynn said, finding his voice rough. He had seen plenty of women in various states of undress in his younger days, but something about Eleanor standing there in his kitchen, flushed from heat and embarrassment, affected him more than he wanted to admit. "Jasper threw a shoe. I just came back to get my tools and fix it." He grabbed what he needed and retreated quickly, but the image stayed with him for the rest of the day. That night at supper, Eleanor was back in her usual proper dress with her hair pinned up, but Flynn kept imagining it loose and flowing, kept remembering the curve of her neck, and the way the afternoon light had made her skin glow. He was in trouble, he realized. Deep trouble. Eleanor seemed to be struggling with something as well. She was quieter than usual during the meal, and when Flynn asked if something was wrong, she hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about what happens at the end of the 3 months. Your mother paid me through September, but after that, I'll need to figure out my next situation. I wanted to ask if you might consider keeping me on permanently. I know that's not what was originally arranged, but I like it here. I like the work, and I think I've proven I can manage the household properly." Flynn's heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with ranch work or physical exertion. The thought of Eleanor leaving at the end of summer had been lurking in the back of his mind for weeks, an unwelcome reality he had been trying not to confront. But the idea of her staying, of this arrangement becoming permanent, raised questions he was not sure either of them was ready to answer. "I'll think about it," he said carefully. "You've done good work, Eleanor. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. But keeping you on permanently, that's a big decision. It would change things." "I know," Eleanor said, meeting his eyes directly. "But things have already changed, haven't they? At least, they have for me." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Flynn knew he should say something, should either acknowledge what was building between them or firmly redirect the conversation to safer ground. Instead, he stood abruptly, carrying his plate to the wash basin. "I need to check the stock one more time before dark," he said, which was true but also an escape. "We'll talk more about this later." He left the house before Eleanor could respond, walking out into the warm evening air. The cattle were peaceful in their pasture, dark shapes against the golden grass, and Flynn leaned against the fence rail, trying to sort through the tangle of his thoughts and feelings. He was falling for Eleanor Reeves. That much was undeniable. She had become essential to his daily life in a way that went far beyond cooking and cleaning. He looked forward to seeing her in the morning, missed her when he was out working, and found himself wanting to share every thought and observation with her. But she was a widow still mourning her husband, and he was a rancher who had sworn off romantic entanglements after watching his father work himself to death, trying to provide for a family. Getting involved with Eleanor meant opening himself up to all kinds of complications and vulnerabilities he had spent years avoiding. Yet, as he stood there watching the sun set over his land, Flynn realized that avoiding vulnerability also meant avoiding joy, avoiding connection, avoiding the possibility of building something more meaningful than a successful ranch. His father had worked hard, yes, but he had also been happy. He had loved Flynn's mother with a devotion that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Was Flynn really honoring his father's memory by living alone and afraid of taking the same risks his father had taken? When Flynn finally returned to the house, Eleanor was sitting on the porch, her mending in her lap, but her hands idle. She looked up as he approached, and in the soft light of the rising moon, she was so beautiful it made his chest ache. "I owe you an apology," Flynn said, sitting down beside her. "I shouldn't have run off like that. What you said earlier about things changing, you're right. They have changed. I've changed." Eleanor set her mending aside, giving him her full attention. "How so?" Flynn took a deep breath, committing himself to honesty, even though it terrified him. "When my mother first hired you, I was angry. I thought I didn't need anyone, that I was doing just fine on my own. But you've shown me that fine isn't the same as good, and being alone isn't the same as being independent. You've made this house feel like a home again. You've made me look forward to coming back at the end of the day. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as my housekeeper and started thinking of you as, well, as Eleanor, as someone important to me." Eleanor's expression was difficult to read in the dim light, but Flynn thought he saw hope warring with caution in her eyes. "I feel the same way," she admitted softly. "I tried not to. I told myself this was just a job, that I needed to keep things professional. But you're a good man, Flynn Ingram. You work hard, you're honest, you're kind, even when you're trying to pretend you're not. I've caught myself imagining what it would be like if this was real, if I was here not because your mother hired me, but because you wanted me here." "I do want you here," Flynn said, reaching out to take her hand. Her fingers were cool against his, calloused in places that matched his own. "Not as an employee, as something more. I know it's fast, and maybe it's foolish, but I think I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor." The words, once spoken, seemed to echo in the night air. Eleanor's hand tightened around his, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "It's not foolish," she said. "Or if it is, then I'm foolish too, because I'm falling in love with you as well. I thought after Thomas died that I would never feel this way again. I thought that part of my life was over. But then I came here, and you were so stubbornly independent, and so clearly in need of someone to care for you, and I couldn't help myself." Flynn laughed, the sound surprising them both. "I was stubborn, wasn't I? I still can't believe my mother did this, but I'm starting to think I owe her the biggest thank you of my life." "We should probably wait before telling her that," Eleanor said with a smile. "She'll be insufferably smug." "She absolutely will," Flynn agreed. Then, gathering his courage, he leaned in slowly, giving Eleanor every opportunity to pull away. She did not. Instead, she met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home in a way that had nothing to do with buildings or land. The kiss was gentle, tentative, the kiss of two people who were discovering each other and did not want to rush. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "So, what do we do now?" Eleanor asked. "I'm still technically your employee for 2 more months." "Well," Flynn said, keeping hold of her hand, "I suppose we could continue as we have been, getting to know each other, spending time together. And then, when the 3 months are up and my mother's arrangement ends, maybe you could stay on as, I don't know, my wife instead of my housekeeper." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Flynn Ingram, are you proposing to me?" "Not officially," Flynn said quickly. "Not yet. I know we need more time. But I'm saying I want to build a future with you, Eleanor. I want you to know that my intentions are serious. When I do propose properly, I hope you'll say yes." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, and Flynn wrapped his arm around her, marveling at how right it felt. "I think there's a very good chance I will," she said softly. They sat together on the porch for hours that night, talking about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about her life with Thomas, about the good times and the hard ones. And Flynn found he was not jealous of the man who had been her first love. Instead, he was grateful that she had known happiness before, that she understood what a good marriage could be. Flynn, in turn, told her about his father, about the lessons he had learned, and the fears that had kept him isolated for so long. Eleanor listened without judgment, asking questions that helped him understand himself better. As July progressed into August, their relationship deepened. They were more open with their affection now, holding hands, stealing kisses when the mood struck, finding excuses to be near each other. Flynn taught Eleanor more about ranching, taking her with him sometimes when he rode out to check the herd. She proved to be an excellent horsewoman, sitting tall in the saddle on a gentle mare Flynn had given her to use. They would ride together across the rolling hills, talking about their dreams for the future. Eleanor wanted to expand the garden, maybe plant an orchard of fruit trees. Flynn wanted to increase the herd, build a better barn, maybe even start breeding horses. They made plans together, weaving their individual dreams into a shared vision that excited them both. It felt natural, easy, as if they had been partners for years rather than months. Flynn's mother visited in mid-August, ostensibly to check on how the arrangement was working out. She took one look at Flynn and Eleanor together and knew immediately that her plan had succeeded beyond her expectations. Flynn braced himself for smugness, but instead, Martha pulled him aside with tears in her eyes. "I'm so happy for you," she said, hugging him tightly. "Your father would be proud. You found someone who's your equal, Flynn. Someone who can stand beside you and build a life with you. That's all I ever wanted for you." "Thank you, Mother," Flynn said, returning the embrace. "And thank you for interfering. I know I gave you a hard time about it, but you were right. I needed Eleanor. I just didn't know it yet." Martha pulled back, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "When are you going to marry her?" "Soon," Flynn promised. "I want to do it properly. Give her a proposal she'll remember, but soon." The opportunity came 2 weeks later. Flynn had finished the cattle drive successfully, selling his stock for a good price that would keep the ranch running smoothly for another year. He returned home exhausted but triumphant, and Eleanor met him at the door with a smile that made the 3 days of hard travel worthwhile. "Welcome back," she said, pulling him into a hug that he returned enthusiastically. "I missed you." "I missed you too," Flynn said, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "Every night on the trail, I kept thinking about coming home to you." "Well, you're home now," Eleanor said, drawing him inside, "and I've made your favorite supper to celebrate." They ate together, Flynn telling her about the drive and the negotiations in Sacramento. Eleanor had her own news. She had successfully preserved dozens of jars of vegetables and fruits from the garden, enough to see them through the winter with plenty to spare. She had also started teaching herself to make cheese from the milk their cow produced, with mixed but improving results. After supper, as the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple, Flynn led Eleanor out to the porch. His heart was pounding, but he felt certain in a way he had never felt about anything except the land he stood on. "Eleanor," he began, taking both her hands in his, "these last few months have been the best of my life. You've changed everything for me. You've made me want things I never thought I'd want. A partner, a family, a future that's about more than just working the ranch. I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your sharp tongue, and your generous heart. I love how you look in the morning with flour on your nose, and I love how you look right now with the sunset in your hair. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life coming home to you." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple gold, with a small sapphire that matched Eleanor's eyes. He had bought it in Sacramento, spending more than he probably should have, but unable to resist. "Eleanor Reeves, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and build a life with you? Will you make this house our home?" Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the emotion in it. "Yes, Flynn, I'll marry you, I'll love you, and build a life with you, and make this our home. Yes to everything." Flynn slipped the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing, holding each other tight as the stars began to emerge overhead. It was perfect, Flynn thought. This woman, this moment, this life they were creating together. It was everything he had never known he wanted, and more than he had ever hoped to find. They married on a clear September morning in the small church in Chico, with Flynn's mother crying happy tears in the front pew and his sister serving as Eleanor's maid of honor. It was a simple ceremony, but it was theirs, and when Flynn kissed his bride, he knew he was the luckiest man in California. The wedding breakfast was held at Flynn's mother's house, with half the town turning out to wish them well. Martha Ingram accepted congratulations on her matchmaking skills with grace, though Flynn caught her looking smug more than once. He did not mind. His mother had been right, and he was happy to let her enjoy her victory. That night, Flynn carried Eleanor over the threshold of their home, and they celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their bedroom. It was sweet and passionate and tender, everything a wedding night should be. Afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight, Eleanor traced her fingers across Flynn's chest and smiled up at him. "I never thought I'd be this happy again," she admitted. "After Thomas died, I couldn't imagine opening my heart to someone new. But you've given me a reason to hope again, Flynn. You've given me a future." "We've given each other a future," Flynn corrected. kissing her forehead. "I love you, Eleanor Ingram. I'm going to spend every day proving it to you." "I love you too," Eleanor said, snuggling closer, "and I'm going to hold you to that promise." As the years passed, Flynn kept his word. He and Eleanor built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Eleanor's practical insights complementing Flynn's experience. They expanded the herd, built a new barn, and planted the orchard Eleanor had dreamed of. The kitchen garden flourished, and Eleanor's preserves and baked goods became so popular in town that she was able to open the small shop she had once saved for, running it 2 days a week while Flynn managed the ranch. Their first child, a boy they named William after Flynn's father, was born in the spring of 1880. He had Eleanor's red hair and Flynn's determined chin, and Flynn had never known it was possible to love something as much as he loved his son. Eleanor proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, but firm when she needed to be. Watching her with their child, Flynn fell in love with her all over again. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Grace, who had Flynn's dark hair and Eleanor's green eyes. She was a whirlwind from the moment she learned to walk, always into something, always asking questions. Flynn adored her completely and was wrapped around her tiny finger from day one. A third child, another boy named James, came 3 years after Grace. He was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and observe while his siblings ran wild. Eleanor said he reminded her of her father, and Flynn could see her missing her parents in the wistful way she would sometimes look at their children. The ranch house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Flynn built on an additional wing with proper bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen where Eleanor could work on her baking projects. They added a front room with comfortable furniture and space for the children to play on rainy days. The house became a home in the truest sense, filled with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of family life. Flynn's mother was a frequent visitor, delighting in her grandchildren and never missing an opportunity to remind Flynn that she had been responsible for his happiness. Flynn always agreed with her because it was true. If Martha had not interfered, if she had not hired Eleanor to keep an eye on him, he would still be alone in that house, eating beans from a can and slowly forgetting what it meant to be truly alive. Eleanor's shop in town became successful enough that she hired a young woman to help her, teaching her the recipes and techniques that Eleanor had perfected over years of practice. The income was useful, but more than that, it gave Eleanor a sense of accomplishment and independence that Flynn understood and supported. He never wanted her to feel like she had given up her dreams for his. Instead, they found ways to pursue their dreams together, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating each other's victories. There were hard times too, as there always are in life. A drought in 1883 nearly wiped them out, and they had to sell off part of the herd to survive. Flynn's mother passed away peacefully in 1885, and though they knew it was coming, the loss hit Flynn hard. Eleanor was his rock through that grief, holding him when he cried and taking over the ranch management while he processed his emotions. 2 of their cattle hands were injured in separate accidents over the years, and Flynn blamed himself, even though neither incident was truly his fault. Eleanor helped him through that guilt, reminding him that accidents happen and that beating himself up did not change the past. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows. They celebrated William's 10th birthday with a party that brought together everyone they knew. They watched Grace learn to ride like she was born in the saddle, fearless and free. They saw James's quiet intelligence blossom as he devoured every book they could get him, and announced at age 8 that he wanted to be a lawyer. They marked their 5th anniversary, then their 10th, each year bringing them closer and deepening their love. On their 15th anniversary, in the autumn of 1893, Flynn and Eleanor took a rare day away from the ranch and the children, leaving them in the capable care of Flynn's sister Caroline, who had married a banker and lived in town, but loved any excuse to spend time with her nieces and nephews. They rode out to the spot where Flynn had proposed, dismounting to sit in the grass and watch the sun set over the land they had built their life on. "Do you ever regret it?" Flynn asked, his arm around Eleanor's waist. "Agreeing to that arrangement with my mother? Taking a job that was basically babysitting a grown man?" Eleanor laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not for a single moment. Well, maybe for a moment or two in those first few weeks when you were being particularly stubborn. But no, Flynn. This life we've built, our children, our home, everything we have together, I wouldn't trade it for anything. You've given me more happiness than I ever thought possible." "You've done the same for me," Flynn said, kissing her temple. "I think about that day I came home and found you cooking in my kitchen, so angry at my mother for interfering. I had no idea that my entire life was about to change, that the woman standing there with flour on her hands and fire in her eyes was going to become my whole world." "Your mother knew," Eleanor said with a smile. "Martha told me once that she knew the moment she met me that I was right for you. She said she could see us together, see the life we would build. I thought she was being fanciful, but she was right." "She usually was," Flynn admitted. "I wish she could see the children now. She would be so proud of them." "She would be proud of you too," Eleanor said. "You've done everything she hoped you would do. You've built something lasting, something that can be passed down to William and Grace and James. You've created a legacy, Flynn." Flynn looked out across the land he had worked for most of his life, the ranch that had been his father's dream and had become his own. But more than the land or the cattle or any of the material success, he was proud of the family he and Eleanor had created. He was proud of the love they shared, still as strong and vital as it had been that first night on the porch when they had admitted their feelings. He was proud of the way they had weathered every storm together, supporting each other, choosing each other every day. "The real legacy is this," Flynn said, gesturing between them. "What we have, Eleanor, the love and the partnership and the life we've built together. That's what I want our children to remember and hopefully recreate in their own lives someday." "They will," Eleanor said with confidence. "We're teaching them by example what a good marriage looks like. They're learning how to be strong and kind, how to work hard and love deeply. They're going to be amazing adults, Flynn, and we'll be there to see it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of the pink and gold. The air was cooling, carrying the first hints of the autumn to come. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the faint sound of the wind through the grass. It was peaceful, perfect, everything Flynn had never known he wanted when he was a lonely man living in an empty house. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Flynn helped Eleanor to her feet, and they rode back to the ranch together. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and light glowed in the windows. Through the curtains, they could see silhouettes moving, their children and Caroline probably preparing supper or playing some game. It looked warm and welcoming and alive, everything a home should be. "I love you, Eleanor Ingram," Flynn said as they dismounted in the yard. "Thank you for saying yes that day. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "I love you too, Flynn Ingram," Eleanor replied, kissing him softly. "And I'd say yes again, every single time. You're the best decision I ever made." They walked into the house hand in hand, greeted by the enthusiastic chaos of their children, demanding to know what was for supper. And did they bring treats from town? And could they please stay up late since it was Mama and Papa's special day? Eleanor laughed and began organizing the meal preparations, while Flynn settled into his chair by the fireplace, William climbing into his lap to tell him about something that had happened while they were gone. This was his life now, Flynn thought with deep contentment. This noise and love and beautiful, exhausting, perfect chaos. This family he had built with the woman who had walked into his house one June day and changed everything. The woman his mother had sent to keep an eye on him, who had ended up stealing his heart instead. And as Eleanor met his eyes across the room, her face flushed from the heat of the stove and glowing with happiness, Flynn knew with absolute certainty that he would not change a single thing about the journey that had brought them here. Every stubborn moment, every awkward conversation, every tentative step toward love had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this love that would last them all their days and beyond. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. William grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He had Flynn's work ethic and Eleanor's practical wisdom, and by the time he was 16, he was managing significant portions of the ranch operation on his own. Flynn watched his son with pride, knowing that when the time came, the ranch would be in good hands. Grace proved to be every bit as fierce and independent as Flynn had suspected she would be. She had no interest in the traditional path of marriage and domesticity, instead declaring at 15 that she wanted to become a teacher. Flynn and Eleanor supported her ambition, arranging for her to attend a teaching college in Sacramento. It was hard to let her go, but they were proud of her determination to forge her own path. James, true to his childhood declaration, pursued law. He was brilliant and driven, winning a scholarship that took him even farther from home than Grace had gone. But he wrote faithfully every week, and his letters were full of affection and gratitude for the foundation his parents had given him. As their children grew and left home to pursue their own dreams, Flynn and Eleanor found themselves alone together again, their relationship coming full circle to where it had begun. They were older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of hard work and laughter. But their love had only deepened, matured like fine wine into something rich and complex and infinitely precious. They still ran the ranch together, though they had hired more permanent help as the years made the work harder. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still talked about everything and nothing. They still kissed like newlyweds sometimes, still held hands when they walked. The passion that had brought them together had evolved into something even more profound. A partnership so complete that they often knew what the other was thinking without words, a love so deep that it had become as essential as breathing. On a warm evening in the spring of 1905, Flynn and Eleanor celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. William had come home from the ranch he now managed with his wife and 3 children. Grace had traveled from the school where she was now head mistress, bringing with her the young man she had finally agreed to marry. James had made the journey from San Francisco, where he practiced law, his wife and infant daughter in tow. The house was full again, bursting with family and love and the sound of grandchildren's laughter. After the big dinner and the cake Eleanor had made, after the gifts had been opened and the children put to bed, Flynn and Eleanor slipped away to their spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night was filled with the familiar sounds of the ranch they had spent a lifetime building. 30 years, Eleanor said softly, leaning her head on Flynn's shoulder. It hardly seems possible. It feels like just yesterday that I was standing in your kitchen, watching you walk through that door, and wondering if you were going to throw me out. I was an idiot, Flynn said, kissing the top of her head. I almost threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too stubborn to see what I needed. But you did see it eventually, Eleanor reminded him. That's what matters. We found each other, we built this life, and now look at everything we have. 3 amazing children who are living their dreams, grandchildren who are healthy and happy, a ranch that's thriving, each other. We've been so blessed, Flynn. We have, Flynn agreed. And every single blessing started the day you walked into my life. I know I've said it 1,000 times, but I need to say it again. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for taking the job, for staying when you could have left, for loving me, even when I was difficult. Thank you for building this life with me. Eleanor lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes still as bright and intelligent as they had been 30 years ago, even if they were now framed by laugh lines and crow's feet. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for being patient while I learned to love again. Thank you for being the partner I needed, the father our children deserved, and the man I'm proud to call my husband. I love you, Flynn Ingram. I've loved you for 30 years, and I'll love you for 30 more if we're lucky enough to have them. And beyond, Flynn said, cupping her face in his hands. I'll love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next. You're my home, Eleanor. You always have been. They kissed under the stars, a kiss that held 3 decades of love and commitment and shared dreams realized. And as they sat together in the comfortable silence that only comes from years of true partnership, Flynn felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. His life had not turned out the way he had planned. It had turned out so much better. Because one day, many years ago, his mother had decided to interfere. She had hired a woman to keep an eye on her stubborn son, to make sure he was eating properly and not working himself into an early grave. And that woman had done so much more than keep house. She had brought light into the darkness, had shown Flynn what it meant to truly live rather than just exist. She had given him a family, a legacy, and a love that would endure long after they were both gone. As the night deepened and the grandchildren's laughter faded into dreams, Flynn and Eleanor remained on their porch, holding hands and watching the stars wheel overhead. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and secure. The work of building this life was done. Now was the time to simply enjoy it, to savor every moment they had together, to love each other with the wisdom and depth that only comes from choosing to stay, every single day, no matter what challenges life brings. And when they finally rose to go inside, to climb the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades, Flynn looked back one last time at the land spread out under the moonlight. This was his legacy. Not just the ranch, but the love that had built it. Not just the cattle and the horses and the orchards, but the family that had grown here. Not just survival, but a life fully and deeply lived. He had come home one day to find a woman cooking in his kitchen, sent by his mother to keep an eye on him. He had been angry and resistant, convinced he did not need anyone. But that woman had become his everything, his wife, his partner, his best friend, the mother of his children, and the love of his life. She had kept an eye on him, true to his mother's wishes. But more than that, she had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never imagined, and given him a life beyond his wildest dreams. And as they lay together that night, Eleanor's head on his chest and his arm around her waist, Flynn sent a silent thank you to his mother, wherever she was. Martha Ingram had known what her son needed before he knew it himself. She had seen the loneliness eating away at him and had taken action, consequences be damned. She had been right in ways Flynn could never have predicted when he first walked through that door all those years ago. The love story that had begun with such an unlikely arrangement had become the foundation of everything good in Flynn's life. And as he drifted off to sleep beside the woman who had changed his world, he knew that this was what happiness looked like: simple, profound, and built one day at a time through the choices two people make to love each other, no matter what. Their story did not end with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, it continued in the quiet moments that make up a life: morning coffee shared before the work begins, conversations in the garden while picking vegetables, laughter over a grandchild's antics, comfortable silences that speak volumes. Every day was another chapter in a love story that had started with cooking and keeping an eye on each other, and had grown into something that would outlast them both. Years later, when Flynn was old and gray and his children gathered around to hear stories of how he and their mother met, he would tell them about that June day in 1878 when he came home to find a stranger in his kitchen. He would tell them about his anger and confusion, about Eleanor's steady confidence and sharp tongue. He would tell them about how slowly, gradually, inevitably, anger had turned to respect, respect to friendship, and friendship to a love that had sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. And he would always end the story the same way. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never knew you needed. Your mother was that for me. She was the answer to a question I had never thought to ask. And every day since, I've been grateful that my own mother knew me better than I knew myself, and that your mother was brave enough to take a chance on a stubborn rancher who thought he was fine alone. Eleanor would always add her own ending, smiling at Flynn with the same love that had burned in her eyes on their wedding day. And I'm grateful I said yes to a job that sounded simple and turned out to be the adventure of a lifetime. Keeping an eye on your father taught me that love isn't always what you expect. Sometimes it's something so much better. Their grandchildren would listen with rapt attention, already learning the lessons their grandparents had spent a lifetime proving: that love is worth the risk, that the best partnerships are built on respect and friendship as much as passion, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary ways, with something as simple as finding someone cooking in your kitchen and choosing to let them stay. And so, the story of Flynn and Eleanor Ingram became part of the family legacy, passed down through generations, as an example of what love looks like when it's built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the willingness to let someone change your life for the better. It was a love story that began with his mother's interference and her determination to keep an eye on him, but it became so much more, a testament to the power of taking chances, opening your heart, and believing that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places.